So we'll give folks just a few minutes to join and get settled in. But before we get on that, let's do a little icebreaker. So today's question is going to be, what is your favorite movie? So Mark, if you want to get us started, what's your favorite movie?
Oh man, favorite movie. I was hoping I'd go second or third so I can kind of get some inspiration.
I had a feeling.
Favorite movie. Geez, I'll go with the one that comes off top of mind. Maybe a recent favorite movie, but like if people haven't seen it yet, the Top Gun movie is pretty. That was pretty sweet. I'd want to go check it out again in IMAX.
Ooh, that would be fun.
That was a really good one. Yeah. So if you got highly big endorsement from my side, if you guys haven't seen it.
I love
Fun
it.
for the whole family. Awesome. Pete, how about you? What's your favorite movie?
It's easy. Ghostbusters.
Nice.
Most
The
quotable
original?
movie ever. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That's right.
Awesome. Can't beat that one. Oh, there we go. All right, everybody's back. Okay, cool. My favorite movie recently, I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once. Has anybody had a chance to see that yet? It's so good. You laugh, you cry. It's very entertaining. Totally recommend that one. Conway, how about you? Any favorite movies lately?
Of late, I don't know, but haven't been to the theaters in a while. However, Forrest Gump has always just been like a bedrock for me. It's a great story. So if folks haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it.
Better run and go watch it soon. Hubert, how about you? What's your favorite movie?
One I always like to watch is right now, maybe a little bit on the opposite side from Conway for the moment, but Margin Call, always a favorite. I watch every once in a while.
I have not seen that one. I'll have to check it out. All right, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're here to talk about from zero to unicorn in 5 years. We're going to do a founder fireside chat with Captivate IQ. Got some awesome panelists today. So we're excited about the amazing content and takeaways that y'all are going to get out of this event. And today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. No need to reinvent the wheel yourself. We'll help you out. We do that through live sessions like this, an online forum, our quarterly summits we just had last week. And if you missed that, go ahead and head on over to our main page on the MSP website, and you can still go ahead and sign up and get access to all of that. And if you're not already a member of MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. But enough about MSP. Today's session would not be possible without our sponsorship from the amazing team at Captivate IQ. So I'm going to hand it off to Mark to say a few quick words about Captivate IQ. Mark?
Thank you, Roxy. Captivate IQ is the new standard for commission management. We help enable companies reclaim the power of incentives with a platform built for revenue streams. What does that mean for everyone else listening on the calls? We're helping companies like Intercom and Gong transform their data, build any commission plan, and simplify their workflows to maximize their productivity and achieve better company alignment.
Gong. Wow. I can only imagine that account. Holy mackerel. That's quite the logo you guys have there.
Thanks to the sales team and everyone else that helped make it possible.
Just a couple reps over there. Just a couple. It's a couple.
Thank you for that, Mark. So great to have y'all as a sponsor today. Well, we're excited to dive right in, but first let's go over some quick housekeeping notes. First of all, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function and we'll be sure to hit them during the event. Audience, please don't be shy. This is your chance to ask whatever questions you'd like. You can also use the chat function to interact with each other. Pete is going to be our moderator today. So I'm going to pass it over to Pete and let's go ahead and get started.
Killer. I'm very excited to talk about compensation today. Are you guys excited to talk about compensation today?
We're very pumped.
You're very pumped. Yeah. Who knew? Comp is sexy. I guess if you're coming from old school comp land with like, Vista equity owned company that shall not be named, like comp can be sexy when all of a sudden like you're using something that actually doesn't make you want to claw your eyeballs out. Awesome. Well, I think one of the things that I think is like really top of mind, and I'm so pumped that we have like all three founders of Captivate on the call here today. And actually, even before we like get into specific comp questions, like one, how did you guys like? What's the kind of like founding story of Captivate IQ? And like, because one, I don't think you guys, for the most part, don't have like a background in like sales, if I recall correctly. And then two, like, a trio of co-founders is like not the most common thing in the world. So maybe you guys can kind of like share with our community, like how Captivate was inspired, Captivate IQ was inspired, and kind of like how how the company ended up getting started.
Yeah, maybe I can kick things off, and maybe to correct one thing, I have some sales experience.
Oh, my
First job
bad.
is selling kids shoes at Nordstrom, which it's a beast of a job, but
no, oh my God, the Nordstrom sales diaspora is like savage. Like when you go back and you look at people who like worked at Nordstrom, like it's like extraordinarily operationally rigorous, like high tempo, very metrics driven. It's crazy. Like oftentimes you'll find people the same way that like you'll go and look back in somebody's resume, be like, oh, they worked at Parametric Technology Corporation, like PTC.
Right.
You'll like go back in someone's resume, you're like, this person really has their shit together. You go back and you're like, oh, cool. They like worked at Brass Plum at Nordstrom.
It's true. It's they're really good about managing out. There's really performance-based culture around it.
Yes.
But they also embody with like selling the store. And so I thought it was a really interesting thing where they, when you think about like trying to create a commission plan that's like right versus trying to be over penalizing or caps or stuff like that. I think Nordstrom had it kind of put it together where they really try to push the whole store rather than, oh, I'm only isolated to my department. And if you needed something else, like you need to go talk to another person. But yeah, our story at Captivate really, the genesis started several years ago. And both Conway, Hubert, and I each have like a big tie into the problem in itself. For me in particular, you can go back to a company called Brightroll, first finance hire under the CFO.
Nice.
And so, the first responsibility I had was, hey, we have new commission plans. We have a new system, new ERP. We need to redo our model. And so what seemed like an easy exercise as someone who came from investment banking, I thought would be 2 hours, ended up taking 2 weeks. And so it was a very painful process. Our sales leader even joked, looked like I got hit by a bus with all the stress. And I think what people don't appreciate it's a very complicated process. You're grabbing all this data, you're building this model, and this model has to be 100% right? Because people are going to get out of it. And then you're sending these statements out to people. You're emailing everyone, putting statements that you're creating in Excel, and you're hoping that they're all right. If they're wrong, they're coming back and you have to redo the process again. And so I was surprised how long it took. 2 weeks out of 13. For us, we would do it quarterly, fortunately. But like that was a lot of myself. And I tried to look at solutions. All the commercial solutions weren't a good fit. So that was kind of the start of the pain point. And Conway had a very similar experience managing commissions, and maybe Conway can give a little bit of your experience with it as well.
You were managing, which company were you managing commission? Were you at Gusto or Google? I'm trying to remember.
I was at Gusto, and
just a couple reps there.
Yeah.
Hundreds.
And I was involved in mostly the sales finance angle of things, helping design comp plans, working hand in hand with sales ops to administer comp plans. And I think the experience was just eye-opening, because what seemed like a fairly ubiquitous and straightforward kind of work stream, not unlike processing payroll for your broader company, turned out to be easy. Exactly. And it was quite the opposite. I think what was perhaps even more surprising was just how little innovation there was in this space.
Totally.
You felt
it's been so weird.
Yeah, and we did a little bit of a walk down memory lane to kind of see what companies had attempted to innovate in this space. And there was a stretch for, I think, north of a decade where you just saw, maybe onesie, twosie companies try to take a stab at this. And for the most part, the legacy players in the space have been the only notable solutions that
Very
folks
weird.
would consider.
Yeah.
And so in particular for a lot of mid-market companies, I think it's been a challenge because,
Yep.
you either pay for something that, kind of feels and looks like it was built in the Stone Age, and something that costs,
The
an egregious
90s.
amount. The 90s.
So the 2000s.
The 2000s.
Stone Age in SaaS. SaaS
In
land.
SaaS, exactly. And, I think there was just a lot of empathy there because of the personal experience that I had personally had that, like Mark, we just felt like there must have been a better way. So in many ways, I think a lot of the journey has been building a tool we wish we had. I think
Right.
it was really that there wasn't, a particularly grandiose 10-year vision of doing something. It was, hey, let's build something we wish we had.
Yeah. Hubert, as a technologist, did you have any experience with commissions?
Somewhat loosely relatable experience. Back in my career, I was at a company called Copilot, and we were basically building technology to help restaurants understand how their marketing programs were doing back in the sort of the era of Groupons and Living Social, and
Oh, wow.
was building a lot of the technology to drive these actionable insights through dashboards and emails and alerts and notifications of that sort. And myself was just looking at raw point of sale data and trying to build all these models and do all this analysis, and was using Excel like a lot of people were back in the day, and just similarly wish that there was a better way to solve this problem. And it's always been something that from a technology perspective kind of sat in the back of my mind as I was working on that product. And since meeting Mark and Conway, the rest is sort of in history.
Yeah, man, I think there's some like really good points kind of throughout that background there that like I think we'll get into here as we discuss a little bit more. But I think kind of like good examples of that would be like Mark, when you were talking about like designing a new comp plan and then rolling it out, like being able to do iteration when things change and it not being like an act of Congress, right? Or like $20,000 worth of like professional services fees or something to like change some software. Something like that's a really important thing. Like if you're a finance person and you're doing kind of like, what if analysis and what have you, right? Like then there's like the recurringness of it. Like if you're actually managing the payroll, or sorry, if you're managing the commissions, like I think the thing that you were kind of joking about earlier, Mark, you're like, thank God we only did it quarterly because it took 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, well, like, wouldn't it be better if you did it monthly, like from a motivation standpoint? Yeah, but what a pain in the ass, right? So like being able to do things like more operationally, in a more operationally like rigorous or kind of like faster clip enables a bunch of different things. And then there's the question of like distributing the information in a way that like motivates behavior and like drives performance. Like that's a really underappreciated thing, right? Because like, performance compensation is like like one of the biggest kind of value propositions of it is that it motivates incremental effort. We're like, hey, look, I'm gonna stay up like cleaning my my pipeline until 10 p.m. while watching Netflix or whatever, because it's gonna drive more output for me as a rep. If there's like a distance to when that information kind of comes back and that feedback loop comes back to me because it's like not communicated to me in a crisp way or whatever, like that's going to erode that connection going back to me. So I think that like there's a couple of different things here which we'll be able to like touch on. I think one thing that's like really a big topic for people right now, obviously, is I think in our industry, and I think you guys kind of have a similar like ideal customer profile to like Atrium a little bit. We have these high growth startups who have 10, 50, 100, I guess in the case of Gong or like Intercom, like hundreds of reps. And there's a little bit of like headwinds in those markets right now, right? Like organizations are seeing kind of seeing a little bit of like tightening with respect to budgets and things like that. You're seeing kind of like win rates deteriorate a little bit. I imagine that comp can kind of play into that. What are the ways that you guys have seen comp being used as like a strategic business lever in a situation like that when you see kind of like economic headwinds and things like that? And maybe Mark, you can start us off, and other folks can comment as appropriate.
Yeah, so I think comp. There's a couple things that we see, and it's funny because we're 5 years old and we've seen some ups and downs in the economy. So there's even just things that we've seen even the beginning of COVID, if everyone remembers, just that the blip where everyone's making changes. So one thing that's very common is compensation gets very much scrutinized. Partly because it's one of the largest line items on people's P&Ls, both just comp in general, but also sales comp as a line item.
Yeah.
What people, the first things people end up doing is they look at who their team is, who the stars, who's performing, and making sure that they're keeping people happy. And then the second thing is comp ends up getting adjusted. You see people put up new plans, there's new quotas. Part of this because when you think about kind of what you called out, power of compensation and incentives is one of the best tools in driving change. In terms of best practices,
what are you seeing? Like, how are people deploying that in a way that like changes behavior that matters right now?
Yeah, so there's there's two themes that we see, and we can go into more of the comp details in a little bit, but like one thing that I think is really important in this time period is actually that level above comp, which is making sure that the changes that are being made at the company level, and I'm sure everyone, whether it's in this room or just in the world right now, are thinking about where their company is navigating towards. And one of the things I've seen in best companies versus not so strong companies is when there's that strong alignment between how we're making changes at the company level and permeating that into the sales org and quotas and all that stuff and comp plan changes. So making sure that if you are making change on a company level, you don't have your sales reps on old plans or old quotas, etc. Transparency is very key.
What would be an example of like an org level change that you'd want to like cascade down? Like one that kind of like pops to mind for me would be like in the economic downturns, like you want to do like churn defense as much as possible.
For sure.
Like you want to make sure that like you're preserving your. I mean, this kind of depends on like the level of stickiness, inherent level of stickiness of your product or whatever, and then like potentially you could imagine that like cascading through. What would be is that an example? Are there other examples of like org level change that it needs to like cascade down?
One of the most common ones is actually in itself, what are the quotas and goals that we're setting for the sales team?
I see.
And so if the company is already adjusting their plan or their internal numbers down, making sure that that's also permeating down to the quotas for the sales team. So what happens right now, what you see is, and you can see for why these things happen, like changes are being made very, very quickly. And there's, if you think about comp, and we can talk about it in a little bit, but you want a lot of planning and strategic foresight in order to make sure it's rolled out effectively. But when the economy is making such a big shift, it's really hard to get all these things right. And some things get forgotten. And the biggest thing I've seen as a common pitfall is maybe it's lack of resourcing, maybe it's lack of just leadership, but not changing goals, not changing the comp plans that are, and you're having more of a disconnect between how the company is trying to operate in this environment and what the sales team is doing.
It's like, oops, we forgot. Finance rebased our financial model, and then we left all the AEs on their existing targets, even though we adjusted them and forgot to tell them. And so the downsides associated with that would be potentially under attaining reps who are grumpy and attrite. And that
That's
would
right.
Is losing sales reps during is losing the revenue engine of your company in the middle of the point at which revenue becomes all the more important, is that a good thing? Probably not, right?
It's not a good thing, and there's one thing that's very important to call out. There's two things. One response to what you mentioned is what happens a lot of times is companies take too long to make changes, and that's usually it's less likely that the team is being nefarious and hey, we're just going to leave
forget
on these other things. It's more common that there's a reason why people keep using the word uncertain. Where are we? And they're looking for information, but people forget we do need to think about where we need to be heading, and you do need information to be operate against. And so what happens is that the period for when you need to make changes continues to get extended, and then you have people still on old plans, but the company is still trying to navigate and adjust. So that's something that we commonly see, and you can empathize, making it make sense, but the problem in itself is that there's not that transparent. Like another key thing is transparency in a conversation about, hey, we're in a broader economy. We are figuring things out. Here's where our latest point of view is, but try not to do that in a very jarring and thrashing way. Just some other quick best practices: optimizing your plans around like just a winning culture and desired outcomes, and then culture preservation is just massively, massively important. One thing you had mentioned is it good to lose reps or your revenue engine in this time period?
Seems not.
Absolutely not. And one of the hard decisions that people need to be making in this environment is, look, if your team is, and we see this a lot, your team on average, their attainment's like, it's dropped now to like 40% on a blended basis. And what ends up happening is you have your star performers who are not doing very well because they're not getting enough pipeline. And that's when you have to make a hard decision. Like, it's probably better to reduce your team and making sure that that team is, that average, that attainment is back up. Because what people don't think about is, it's not like your lowest performers leave. What actually is common is your best performers leave. And it's this vicious cycle where, okay, team is not performing, your best performers leave. Then you're like even in a worse spot, when the better decision is to, hey, we need to kind of make sure the team's in a good spot. Let's take care of them to the extent that we can. But if we really can't, let's talk about, reducing in force and getting that team number, that attainment number back into a good spot. So we're retaining the overall health of the sales org.
Yeah. One thing you were kind of mentioning there is like the elongated like decision making or like research period or whatever. We should come up with a term for it. But I think probably one of the things that ends up like making it such that people are loath to like cascade changes in a plan is because like the thing you were talking about earlier, Mark, about your bright roll time, about like, oh man, like what a pain in the ass to like modify the plan or like modify comp plans or whatever. But I think like with modern comp software, the good news is that like that isn't an act of Congress. And I know, Conway, you primarily work on the product stuff at Captivate. What are some of the things that you have seen your customers doing, like leveraging the kind of like modern capabilities of like non-Stone Age
Yeah.
kind of like comp software in order to like compress that time period? Because I hear what Mark is saying. It's like we're figuring it out. And part of that is probably like, man, if we're not sure if we change the plans, like it's gonna be such a pain in the ass to like change them back or whatever, versus like, oh yeah, like it's not a big deal to like update it on a recurring basis. Are you seeing folks like, be iterative because modern software allows for that? What have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that, if I were to be fully transparent, we've been able to benefit from without being entirely intentional with our product is the extent to which we've solved for implementation speed, both from the user's perspective, but also for our professional services team, if and when companies do want to engage with our resources. And just to kind of give everybody some context, early on, one of the things that we found to be particularly valuable in the way that we were building the application, without again being entirely intentional, was the fact that when you made a change to a formula or to a particular data point, you'd get real-time feedback around the sort of downstream changes that took effect because of that change. And that's a characteristic that I think a lot of people have become used to using Excel.
Yeah, totally. Right.
And it's not something that you value, or at least it's not something you understand the value of until you're faced
until you're
with
doing
solution.
this. Like,
exactly, right?
And then you're like, and it's like,
right.
Okay, what about right? Like, and so okay, so that and so like, and so Captivate has that capability of like seeing the like live what if. Man, Mark.
That's right.
Mark at Bright Roll is like, oh man, if only.
And I think one of the reasons why that's really important is because when you're implementing a plan, particularly a complex one, and I'd argue that most plans that we're seeing today are more complex on average. And so one very common type of plan that you saw at the onset of the pandemic was a shift from paying people on bookings to paying people on cash receipts or some form of trigger that established confidence to the company that they would be able to collect on a particular new customer. And that required a lot more complexity because you're effectively maintaining schedules, you were accruing. And, that kind of complexity, it becomes harder to model unless you have that kind of real-time feedback. So that's just something that I think has always been, core to our application. That's made it much, much easier for people to not only be more agile, make changes more quickly, but also just be much more confident that when they're making the change, the change is what they intended to kind of create. So, beyond that, though, I think one other change, or not change, but capability of and I don't think this is necessarily specific to Captivate IQ, but modern solutions in the sales stack is, I think today you're also providing people, you're also seeing a lot of solutions provide people with a lot more collaborative capabilities that allow them to catch issues that otherwise would be impossible for a single admin to identify. And so, whether that's introducing things like approval workflows or better permissioning capabilities, as simple and table stakes as those might sound, for commissions, just given the long tail of calculations that go into a commission plan, those capabilities, I think, go a long way to making sure that you can move quickly, you can catch errors without getting everything perfect on like draft one. So that's another thing that I'd highlight.
Which I think all of those things kind of relate to that idea of like compressing the time from, analysis or kind of like, rumination on like the changes you're going to do, and saying, hey, like we know that, like, I think what you're describing there is like, okay, if we did this change, what would be the what if associated with that? And then have multiple eyes on that in order to say, oh, actually, that's not good. Or like, ooh, what if we like did a little bit more like this here, and then this comes out of it. Okay, great. I'm so glad that we were able to do that here, with a rich data set as opposed to over here in like a Google Sheet or what have you, where we would have to do that. Okay, great. Let's like package this and then distributed it out. And like now the behaviors are being changed, and we're having the impact that that we want to see. Nice. I think one of the things you had noted earlier was people changing from bookings to maybe like cash receipts or whatever. What are some other kind of like comp modifications that you guys observed? I mean, maybe it was during COVID, but that was, I don't know, that was like 3 or 4 months where people were like, like what would be examples of like well done comp modifications or changes in reaction to like a wobbly economy?
One of the things that I think, to kind of inform like how I think about good changes, is just think about what's important for the business. And so in, a pandemic, if it's really important for you to have cash on hand, are you introducing an incentive to your team to solve for better payment terms, right? And better in terms of being more favorable for the company. And so if you haven't, that's an opportunity to potentially give people a small accelerator or a flat bonus for, solving for upfront payment, or giving more bonus, more credit to multi-years, right? Those are all, I think, mechanisms that, or changes that we're seeing become much more common, particularly around SaaS. I'd say another thing that I've noticed a little bit more over the past 2 quarters is, I think you're seeing a lot more folks look at, and I should say, they're looking at things that aren't necessarily fair or aren't necessarily a priority to focus on. So as much as you might want to introduce components to your commission plan, I think at times it's also important to take away. So an example of this could be expansion. Not to say that, you should assume that expansion is, a thing of the past, but perhaps before your expansion assumptions were too aggressive, perhaps right now it's going to be a bit more effective if you were just comping on logo retention as opposed to expansion. Now, that's obviously not entirely possible depending on the team you're on, You know, if you're on an AM or CSM team, perhaps that's just core to the nature of the function. But taking away certain components or putting a smaller emphasis on certain components of a plan, I think those are also things that we're seeing.
Do you guys have many customers using you guys for customer success?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about comp is that while, you know, folks in this room might refer to sales folks as an account executive or a BDR, when you look outside of the echo chamber, those salespeople have very, very different names. They might have the name of a recruiter or the name of an agent or the name of a banker, right? And all of these people, regardless of the title you want to give them, a big chunk of their compensation is in the form of some performance-driven metric. And so all of these people are, you know, what we kind of consider the payees that we support through our system.
Right. So as long as the outcomes are like modeled in some sort of database in some sort of capacity, usually, do you guys work with other CRMs outside of Salesforce? Do you guys work with like other databases as well?
Yeah, definitely. You know, we work with effectively any source. You know, some of our integrations are native, others aren't. But beyond that, I think HubSpot's a pretty common one that we also see.
Oh, wow.
You know, I think it's also very contingent on the segment you're targeting. So, you know, SMBs might be more inclined to use a tool like a Pipedrive in certain cases. When you move further upstream, you get some legacy players that, you know, we don't need to talk about as much. But yeah, we deal with a variety of different sources.
Nice. I think one of the things that you guys were kind of mentioning earlier was this notion of like collaboration, and like collaboration around like having multiple eyes on the comp plan. And I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of get your take on was like, who are the other kind of like stakeholders who need to be kind of informed or involved in like compensation modifications or adjustments? Because I think a lot of there's, you know, use like finance as an example, right? There's a lot of people in the organization who are less familiar with like, you know, how the sausage is made in like SDR land or AE land or like AM land or what have you. Like, who are some of the other various stakeholders that ought to be involved in these discussions and in these modifications and what have you? And then how do you make sure that like folks are appropriately aligned on any of these changes and so on and so forth? And I don't know who would be best positioned to address this topic. So I'll leave it to you guys to figure out who can tackle that.
I could jump on this one. It's you know, we think about this a lot from a go-to-market perspective, and if people are curious, I do think segmentation is a dimension that I'll introduce here, because I think you see this changing as you get larger and larger in companies. So to give you a sense, if we had an XY chart and, you know, the X graph was more about company size, you'd see in the smaller end of companies, and, you know, the Y chart being like the different stakeholders that get involved, you'll see on the left side, which is smaller companies, it's really, you know, we actually even struggle with this sometimes. Like, it's a hot potato topic of who owns commissions and who's involved. We've seen it commonly be a shared responsibility. CEOs is actually a common stakeholder for younger companies. Then it goes into like the most capable Excel person. So finance or biz ops or sales ops. Usually sales ops not created at that point. So it's probably finance or some type of biz ops role. But let's say now you get to about 100 employees. You know, it's probably a decent size for on the low end of the market. Usually it's sales ops or finance. And it's the perspective is much more, hey, we need to automate this stuff, or we need to like have a process, a defined process to reduce the manual time spent. Then as you get larger, let's say, you know, mid-market-ish types of companies, you now then have more of a specialized person who's owning this. You know, it still can be sales ops or finance, but, you know, now it's more of a defined responsibility. But other things start to get introduced. You start to see, it goes two ways. You start to see accounting get more involved sooner, because like commissions actually is a big accounting line item, not just showing up on the P&L, but you have a lot of accounting related processes that need to get taken into effect. Accruals. If you have more of a subscription-based component, then you're going to have to deal with ASC 606. I'll spare everyone the noise.
Sounds exciting.
It's a very fun topic that we could do over a lot more beers.
Sounds like beers would be required.
So accounting starts to get very involved in more of a process in managing the perspective and closing the books. Then you start to get introduced into the strategic side of sales ops. So remember, we come to a world in the lower end of the spectrum or lower end of the market where it's just automating and getting through it. Yeah. Now it's like, hey, we've got data. We can start to iterate. We can maybe introduce things like spiffs, where we could introduce micro behaviors that we want to see. Maybe it's, we want to, incentivize around a competition. Maybe you want to incentivize around like continued winning, if reps just blowing out their quota, multiple quarters in a row and introducing new incentives around that front. So you start to see more strategic components. Then as you get into like low cap enterprise, it starts to become a very multifaceted approach. Now your teams are very large, people are having more inputs, and sales leadership is looking at comp, not just from, hey, like, what are we paying people? It's how are we thinking about retention? Who are our performers? Where are the teams struggling? So it becomes more analytical of, hey, like, if you really think about it, if you can tie comp really well with the performance and seeing that view, and our software can provide this, you start to get really powerful views that your board's really interested in seeing. Do you have a repeatable model, for example? And what view do you want to show than showing like, well, how many people are hitting attainment? And like which teams are hitting attainment? That's something that we talk about at our board level. You'd rather have everyone getting closer to quota than like, hey, four people destroy quota, but then you have a whole set of employees that are not doing very well. That shows that you don't have a repeatable model. You have more like an all-star model or like a Chicago Bulls model, which is great to some extent, getting off the ground, but that doesn't build a repeatable business.
It's one thing to be able to like field 5 all-stars if you like truly want to scale as like a SaaS, like as a B2B sales organization. You need to figure out a way of like having success with like dozens, hundreds, etc. And like, good luck being like, oh, we only hire like top performers. Cool. Talk to me when you need to get into your second 10 reps, into your second 50 reps, or your second 100 reps. Like we need to have a system here. Hubert, one thing I wanted to ask about is, especially like as Mark was talking about, kind of like accounting being involved, and we were talking about like different databases, or like consuming information off of different databases. I imagine there's like some kind of like technical ramifications associated with like consuming information from various different systems and making it such that that's not fragile, and then it's also like not a huge pain in the ass. It doesn't require a bunch of like custom development or whatever. And then also there's probably like downstream consumers, like Mark was talking about, like in a board meeting, the API of course is like the screenshot. Here's a screenshot, put it in a slide or whatever. But there may be downstream consumers of this information, like in an ERP system or an accounting system or what have you. What are the implications of that for like Captivate IQ from a development and kind of like architecture standpoint? Like it sounds like being able to support any database on the way in sounds like a very important thing there, but maybe you could kind of share a little bit about how like you guys have gone about that from a technical standpoint. Not too technical because like we don't want you to fall asleep.
One thing that you'll find at Captivate IQ is that, to your point, data, depending on the size of the company, can come in very different forms or from different sources. And so we've built a engine that is extremely flexible to allow you to define the data that you need to operate against, and then define your sort of commission plan logic on top of that. So we've designed the product in a way such that, we try to get people to follow some best practices around how to manage data, separating data from logic. And so allows you to then do things like build your commission plan, but also make iterations on it or make forks of it to do scenario analysis or what if calculations and things of that sort. And then sort of after that, all the data that gets generated in Captivate IQ is then also accessible for you to ingest from different points. And so You might process a set of payouts, back in June, and sometime later in the year, you need to go back and see what happened to all of that data. And we sort of have all of that snapshotted for you and prepared and readily available.
Do you guys have multiple, now that I'm thinking about this, do you guys have like customers who are using Captivate for like the commissioning, but then there's like multiple databases going into it? So like Salesforce, like, I don't know, say like Salesforce from a sales perspective, but then like Greenhouse or Lever or like fill in the blank from a recruiting perspective, or maybe like Zendesk from a customer success or a support perspective. Is that like, is there like a multi database into Captivate play, or am I like talking pie in the sky here?
No, I mean, that's definitely something that you start to see supported. I think commonly, you'll have CRMs and ERPs get integrated to do, plans similar to what Conrad mentioned earlier around maybe having some gates in place to, pay out on, invoices received or something like that.
Right.
But
that has
similarly,
the
you
feedback.
could also
Right. Like it's like, here's the AEs. It's like close one over here in the CRM, and then payment information from the ERP. So I guess, yeah, multi-database for a single genre. Got it. Okay. I should have thought about that. But is there for like multi-genre as well, or like multi-discipline?
Yeah, I mean, other common data sources that get integrated are data warehouses. So you could bring in all sorts of sort of other types of business data, Zendesk tickets, all of the sort of post-sales stuff as well to sort of incentivize around that as well.
Right, because that's really important, like a usage-based. Like we have a number of customers who at Atrium that do like usage-based, right? Where like, I don't know, who are some like pretty good examples of like usage-based companies? Like, I don't know, like Brex, right? It's just like, hey, it's one thing to say, a bunch of people, provision a bunch of credit cards or whatever. Is spend actually happening? Or like, I have a bunch of, friends who are former sales leaders from like Trip Actions as an example, right? So like, hey, cool, we like signed up for Trip Actions, and then like how much actual travel spend is crumbing across the platform. And so the problem with that is like all that information like lives in the app, and then it goes over to like Snowflake or Redshift or whatever. And so and like oftentimes it's like, oh, you have to like visualize that in like Tableau or like Looker or whatever in order to like, in our case, this topic comes up because you want to measure performance on the sales team, right? Like the outputs in order to tie it to the inputs. But in you guys' case, it's like, yeah, we got to pay on the outputs, right? And so folks are like connecting Snowflake and Redshift into Captivate IQ in order to be able to pay on the actual like performance, like on ongoing spend or like ongoing consumption.
Yeah,
wow.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's cool, because like the way that a lot of organizations like try to hack that is like they'll put a proxy into the CRM. They'll put like a demand proxy in there, like, or one of the other things too is that they'll like, it's almost like the commercial model is like the tail and the dog is like the software, or like the software capabilities, or it's like, hey, if like it would be way better if we could charge on a usage-based model or whatever, but because it's such a pain in the ass and it's hard for us to measure, we're going to require people to like make commitments up front, even if it hurts our win rates, which is obviously not ideal, because it's so hard for us to measure the ongoing, the ongoing spend or whatever. Okay, wow, that's pretty rad. So kind of like, changing gears just a little bit here. You guys have seen kind of like a big transition from kind of like old school way of like doing comp, where it's just like, here's a comp plan, we ship it, it's like cast in stone. Moses came down from the mount, and like if anyone asks to change it, like, I'm sorry, we're throwing you overboard, right? Because like, do you know how long it took us to make this, and how long it took us to like code and how expensive it was to code this into our existing commission plan software? What do you guys see is kind of like where things are kind of heading, aside from like, economic wobbliness or whatever, but like what are the most forward thinking organizations doing from a sales compensation standpoint right now? What will they be doing across the next couple of years?
So there's a couple of themes that we have identified internally as a company that we call it the universal truths. So one thing that was actually, I'll give one quick story and then I'll kind of lead into it. I remember when we were researching, we talked this big Fortune 100. And one of the feedbacks they had, just to give you a sense of how long their comp plan process was,
Oh God.
they were saying, so that it's centralized. So think, and when I say global company, I mean over probably 200,000 employees worldwide, if not greater. It's a big one. And it's centralized. And they said that if they have a comp plan change they want to make, it takes 2 years.
Yeah, it must. Easy.
And just think about that for a second. Like, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call are probably used to like faster changes. Imagine if you had to make a change and you had to wait 2 years. You might not even be at the job anymore. Like if you use average tenure that you see in tech of like 1.4 years, it's insane. So one thing they're talking about was we can't respond to the market very quickly. If you think about how long it takes to make changes in 2 years, that's a long time. So I'm using that as a backdrop. There's a couple of things that we have seen nowadays, and we think kind of what you see in the lower end of the market starts to become more of a truth for what enterprise and bigger companies are doing.
Yeah, they want it too.
Exactly. So the first universal truth is that we do see the role of sales ops being different. I think back in the day, especially in the companies that I've been at historically, sales ops was much more all in and around Salesforce. Like you're a Salesforce admin, you're enforcing compliance, and you're seeing a different breed of sales ops being incorporated, much more analytical, much more, frankly, I see often profiles from the big consulting companies, BCG, Bain, McKinsey,
100%.
profiles going in, and they're bringing that strategic lens. And so what you're seeing is there's this bigger expectation on how can we utilize sales ops to drive, better company alignment or top line goaling and just like drive more inherent efficiencies. The second thing that we're seeing is that companies are increasingly being more competitive, and there's more competition. Case in point, we've had this bull market for the last 13 years. Every space, I'm sure in this call, there's a lot of people in this call where they're like, man, like you read TechCrunch and it's like, it's another one of our competitors that just got funded. And what that is creating is you can't wait you can't copy someone else's commission plan and think that's good enough. And you can't wait to respond. You need to be making changes faster. You need to be adapting to your business faster. And so that's creating much more frequent changes or frequent plan changes in order to respond to the market. And so kind of going back to that other example I mentioned earlier with the big company, if you're taking 2 years, which I doubt most people are, but like if you're taking even just a longer considerable amount of time, think about that as money left on the table that you're not responding soon enough. The third kind of universal truth that we're seeing and that we really believe in is that there's more data to track. If you go back 10, 20 years, even I think people are surprised, but sales comp's actually a pretty old industry. One of the oldest companies that probably beyond a lot of people on this call is Trilogy Software back in the early 90s coming out of Stanford. So
they made comp software.
They had two parts of their business. One was CPQ, and then the other one was commissions. And so
I had no idea. I only know Trilogy because like they're well known for having a really badass engineering culture. And like really awesome engineering diaspora, and also a founder who really likes to party and like throw insane parties. They made CPQ and comp software. That's insane.
Yeah, those are their two main business lines. And then the funny fact is like the team that left Trilogy went to Calidus, and then the team at Calidus left to create Exactly. So you can kind of trace this like heritage going.
There's only been like one posse, and they just got to go from place to place until now with you guys.
And so the thing that we're seeing now is more data is being tracked. You heard from Conway talk a little bit about how you think about the right commission plans. One thing I would add to is like spiffs. People are spiffing more often. And when you see what people are trying to do, it's trying to be creative using more data inputs. Now you have, who are the competitors involved in the deal? Or, where did you source these leads from? And how do you want to incentivize a little bit differently? We always do say, like, from a high level, don't get too crazy with your commission plan. Like, last thing someone wants is a laundry list. But at the same time, you can get into more micro behaviors in terms of being able to influence the things that you want and incentivizing on the things you want. So going back, we believe there's more data proliferation, which is allowing people to create more tailored plans that better align with the company's objectives.
Right. And like historically, you wouldn't do that. Like if you knew that the data wasn't well structured, you might not do that. And then to your point, like, if it takes forever to like change something, then you might like, oh, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could spiff on, upfront payment or like whatever, or like, wouldn't it be super rad if, we have a kicker on win rate on self-prospected deals by AEs or whatever in order to reduce. And so, yeah, I mean, this is like one of the key things that shows up in like technology is like new capabilities unlock creativity, which then drives like things that you're kind of talking about. That like we see that with our customers as well, where probably like the best example, and I forget which one of you guys, if somebody used to work at Google, but like I think a key insight of this is like Google realized like the faster you could make search, the more searches people would do. That was like an early insight. It was like as they just made it like faster and fast, and so there was like a whole team that was just focused on making it like stupid fast because people would drive more searches. Similarly, like if it's really easy to make comp changes, right? If it's really easy to like integrate more more facets for, then like you'll start doing these different things, and like all of a sudden the sort of thing that would be like crazy historically, like, oh, okay, the SDRs get paid $50 per opportunity they create, but they get paid $75 if it's it's a content downloader as compared to a demo request hand raiser, because those are a little bit more calorically intensive, so we want them to be like incentivized, a little bit harder to go after them. But would you ever do that off of a lead source field historically? Well, maybe historically you would never do that, but like now all of a sudden, like marketing can get involved in it because say, hey, we're going to run a big campaign around XYZ. And you know what? Like we really, 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 really want to make sure that the SDR team is all over these leads, like, ducks on a June bug. And so we're willing to like throw in some extra kickers on that to really drive attention, as opposed to like just like begging and pleading. And so like those sort of things, you like tell that story to someone a year ago or 2 years ago, and they're like, that's cute, man, like good luck, like you'd never be able to do that. But I think that's what you guys are noting, is like that's the sort of thing that like this sort of flexibility, and it actually kind of all ties together, like Hubert was talking about earlier. Conway was talking about earlier about like seeing kind of like the what if behaviors, like, oh, okay, like use the marketing example. Okay, we're probably going to get this many leads that's coming out of this program right here. So like, what's the amount of spiff we can drive on that if we do this? Ooh, that's more budget than we wanted. What about like this right here? Oh, okay, that's like tenable. Being able to see that what if and then like decide to like ship it live is is really important, to be able to see that all the way through there. We actually had a question from the audience here, and I wanted to ask you guys on this. And I feel that I should know this answer, but how many sales reps do you guys have at Captivate right now? Because I imagine that you guys use Captivate IQ for your sales team. What is like kind of ideal customer profile for you guys? And then like, obviously like you guys are in that. How many reps do you guys have? And like, what are the sizes of organizations that primarily work with Captivate IQ and kind of get the most utility out of the solution?
Yeah, and just so I understand the question, because I think there's two parts. Is it how many sales reps we have, or who are we targeting in the
yeah, but Srini had a question. He was like, I'm sure you guys drink your own Kool-Aid. How many reps do you guys have? And I was like, cool. And then also like, what is the ideal profile in the world, right? Or the range there?
Our go-to-market org. So if I hear that question right, it's like, I think it's more like using Conway's nomenclature, payees. So our go-to-market org within our commission system, there's probably about 60 to 80. We include BDRs, we include SEs, we include AEs, AE managers, basically the entire funnel. And then Conway actually has a whole separate one, even for the CX, or we call it customer experience, but post-sales on that side, which has probably, you have to keep me honest, because I think that's a little bit of a different system, or different, like we bifurcated it.
Yeah, there's probably honestly another 50 to 100 people alone on those post sales plans. So call it 100, 150 altogether.
Damn. Right. And then the sort of organizations. So that's actually really interesting from an ICP standpoint, because like our SDRs score ops. Like we have this. It's not a complicated scoring algorithm, but essentially like an opportunity, like the way that we score ops is like a certain number of points for how many account executives are in an organization, a certain number of points for how many SDRs in an organization, and then there's like a kicker for how many sales operations people there are in an organization as well. Because with Atrium, because we make data-driven sales management software, like the more sales operations people there is, usually that's a better signifier of like analytical rigor. So in you guys' case, like you're probably looking at organizations. It's like this number of SDRs, this number of AEs, this number of CSMs, and that kind of rolls up. What's like the bands at which like Captivate IQ starts becoming interesting to organizations, and like where you guys kind of cap out from, okay, that's like too large for us, and like you guys are probably gonna have like old broken systems anyway. What are the kind of bands there?
It's continuing to change as we mature. But if I already gave that line in the sand today, we support organizations probably down. I think employee size is an easier one because different industries. What you made one quick nomenclature or one quick clarification. Different industries tend to have different, like let's say recruiting or staffing. You might be surprised, but like 90% of that organization might be on commissions. So
yeah, like especially in a staffing agency, yeah, like everyone.
So we
totally.
We kind of just use employee size as a rough metric. So employee size, probably say roughly between 80 to 100 employees on the lower end of things, and then going up to about an employee organization. I'd say probably about 7,500, maybe 10,000 is about where we see things. And then as we continue to work on product, we're going to continue to push that ceiling up and unlocking what we call more like upper enterprise functionality and features and processing.
That's crazy. Another kind of cool question here. Srini has really good questions. Does Captivate allow for A/B testing of incentive programs and to pick what works best? I mean, part of that is like the what if, but it's not like pushed live. I also could imagine it might be a little weird to do like A/B testing in an organization where like some set of reps are on one thing and some set of reps on another thing. Like they talk with each other, right? So I guess maybe the higher level question here is like, what are the mechanisms by which you can do like comparatives on different comp plans and kind of see like what the results are? Is that anything that like you guys as customers do?
We do, and I think Colin, you were touching on this earlier with the what you were mentioning with the earlier question. Do you want to touch on this one?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the most common exercises that we see most people do, particularly before the beginning of a new year, is they'll take the historical data, historical data being your meetings booked or your close won, close loss ops. They'll take all the historical data from the previous year and funnel it through a new plan. That new plan might be a derivative of an existing plan. It might be an entirely new plan. And they'll see what type of payout differences you'll get out of the new plan. Now, there's a bit of, I think, caution in that approach, which is a good approach just in terms of learning. But the caution is that, by definition, if you didn't have the new plan in place, you weren't driving the particular behaviors. Exactly. Yeah. And so, there's a bit of sensitivity around that. But we see that very frequently, and that's certainly something that our platform supports.
Yeah, I guess the thing that you could this is like a pop quiz, right? It's like the mechanism by which you would like try to get people, like if you're trying to do an A/B test, what you're trying to see is like, if I make this change, will it change this behavior? And so maybe what you could, rather than like splitting it into two different populations, what you could potentially do is add a spiff layer to it, where it's essentially just like this uplift, where it's like, oh, we're spiffing this thing right here, see how that works, and then that can like get rolled into the actual comp plan in the future to say, oh, okay, like that trial balloon worked really well, or like, yeah, nobody gave a shit about that, so like we're not going to involve that.
Yeah, I mean, one practical thing that we've seen some companies do, and something I saw, personally at Gusto was, to your point, Pete, you can't necessarily have people on the same team have different comp plans, but you can, find two different teams, like a SMB team and a mid-market team, and give the spiff, for instance, to the mid-market team, see how that plays out. If it delivers good results, potentially start to distribute that more broadly. Yeah.
Nice. I see Roxy's here. Roxy, are you here with the hook to like pull us on stage?
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Nice.
Yes. Really quickly though, before we wrap things up, just wanted to get a quick takeaway from everybody. Just a short, quick, tweetable quote that you want to leave the audience with. So how about Mark? How about you?
Ooh,
I always put you on the spot.
I know. I'll probably just go back to, a lot of it we're talking in and around, what we do at the company. So maybe tweetable quote. I should have better prepared on this one. Well, I think if there are any questions around comp plan, we're always happy to help. But just to kind of give a sense of who we are, Captivate IQ, again, we're the new standard in commission management, and we're helping companies just reclaim the power of incentives with a platform built for revenue teams. So we're always happy to catch up and talk a little bit more about some things we talked about today, or even just a little bit more about your own existing process.
Nice.
Awesome. Thank you. And Conway, some quick words from you?
Yeah, I think comp plans can be complicated, and more often than not, what we see is people just copy what they see in the wild. But
Yeah,
it should really be like it should be a very helpful tool for the business. And I would always encourage folks to start with what you need the company to accomplish and find a way to express that in the comp plan. Going back to, hey, cash is important these days. How can we solve for, making sure the sales team secures better payment terms, right? So I would say start with the goals of the company, translate that into your comp plan.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Hubert, want to close us out?
Not sure if I have a great one, but I think, looking at data is going to help us make better decisions. And, and sort of as we enter sort of the macroeconomic uncertainties that we're going to be facing, that's going to be one thing that's going to help us get to the right answers.
Yes, data for sure. Data is always the answer. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much, Captivate IQ, for being a wonderful sponsor. Thank you, Pete, for being an awesome moderator. Appreciate everybody. Boys, I'll meet you backstage. Audience, thank you so much. Be sure to check out the recordings and key takeaways on our website. They'll be available shortly after this. And check out our upcoming events. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.